Turn-based games emphasize important decisions. By limiting the number of opportunities players have to take actions, those individual opportunities are given a lot of weight. As a result, players have to be highly strategic, considering their options and making the most out of every turn. You tend to be given the chance to plan out moves with full control, as turn-based games typically have zero time constraints. It's this sense of control and ability to always make what you consider to be the right decision that makes turn-based games good. But turn-based games can be very slow. They often involve a lot of thinking and downtime, and sometimes the limited number of opportunities to act can result in games that don't offer a lot of room for creativity. Real-time games emphasize the opposite. Real-time games are all about action. They test skills like mechanical aim, reflexes, fast decision making, and knowledge of shortcuts or specific abilities. These games can and will have strategic elements, but the success of any strategy depends on your ability to pull it off. You might see a perfect opportunity to break stealth with a headshot or counter a knight-heavy army with some pikemen, but if you don't have the mechanical skill or knowledge of shortcuts to make it work, then it isn't going to happen. This can be considered the downside of real-time games when strategy is important. Some plans might fall through due to a lack of skill, and the satisfaction of pulling off a particularly cunning and creative strategy can be missed out on due to mistakes. But what if there was another way? What if we had a system with the variety and scope of real time, but with the strategy and the control of a turn-based system? What if we had a system where our turns became shorter but greater in number, then shorter again and again? What if we had a system where our turns are so infinitesimally small that they become indistinguishable from real time? Well, we do. This is effectively what real time with pause does. Real time with pause is a system where a game plays out in real time, but at any moment a player can hit the pause button and either plan out their next set of actions or schedule some moves to occur when the pause ends. In the background here you can see subset games Faster Than Light, which is not only one of my favourite games with a real time with pause mechanic, but also one of my favourite games in general. So what does real time with pause actually achieve? Well, it puts the emphasis on strategy and decision making and reduces the requirement for good mechanical skill in a tactical strategy game, but without limiting opportunity. So let's look at why Faster Than Light is so good. Its quality comes primarily from the range and quantity of important choices that you can make while playing, both in a big picture sense with the direction of upgrades and acquisitions, but also within its deep strategic micromanagement. So how does real time with pause help? Let's start with the micromanagement. The pause option allows you to make the right plays at the right moment while focusing on several areas of your ship. You can time the shots of your weapons to best avoid enemy shields, move borders around on the enemy ship to cause the most havoc, while also positioning your crew to repair and control systems. Without the pause feature, it would be awkward and even frustrating to concentrate on these three separate areas simultaneously, and casual players would either have to play suboptimally, risking costly mistakes and deaths, or avoid strategies like boarding altogether. This also gives you more freedom in your longer term strategies when purchasing or upgrading systems and weapons. You know that if you purchase a laser to combine with your missile, that you can take out shields with the missile and immediately use the beam when the enemy ship is undefended, and you're never going to miss out on this opportunity through timing. Without the pause feature, some strategies in Faster Than Light wouldn't always have a payoff, and the game would be shallower as a result. Real time with pause emphasises the strategy itself over the player's ability to pull it off. This emphasis on planning over execution is also present in Dungeon of the Endless, another indie strategy game with permadeath elements. Dungeon of the Endless is a twist on dungeon explorers and turret defense games with elements of RPG character progression thrown in too. It's a few years old now and regularly on sale, so I highly recommend adding Dungeon of the Endless to your wishlist because it is a fantastic game. In Dungeon of the Endless, your goal is to protect a power crystal and carry it with you through the floors of a buried spaceship until you reach the surface. Looking after the crystal is paramount, but threats can come from multiple directions, turrets and generators you build can be damaged, and your characters can be killed. It's a lot of things happening at the same time, and even if you knew all the hotkeys in the world, you can't be concentrating everywhere at once. Unless you can. One quick click of the pause button and suddenly at once is as long as you need it to be. Dungeon of the Endless also has an online co-op mode, which makes it useful for this discussion because the online mode in the game doesn't have the pause function. There are mods to spoof it by slowing the game clock down, but by default the option isn't there. I'm guessing the idea was that if players could pause the game, the other player might find it annoying, but what it really led to was just a frustrating experience in general. Keeping the crystal safe is so important that you had to play very cautiously and never push out too far. You can spend food resources to heal your characters, and without the ability to pause and check your health, you are forced into healing early just in case, wasting a lot of resources that could be used for upgrades. Many of the interesting decisions that made Dungeon of the Endless so entertaining just weren't practical without the option to pause. So, Faster Than Light and Dungeon of the Endless both used this system to good effect, but are there other titles that don't use real time with pause but could have benefited from the mechanic? From games I've played recently, the one that springs to mind is Book of Demons, a really interesting dungeon crawler loosely inspired by the original Diablo title. Like the two games we've just talked about, Book of Demons has a lot to keep track of and plan around. You want to keep an eye on your health, check ability cooldowns, track the enemies around your character who might attack you, follow your cursor to see where you're attacking, and also notice these special enemy types that need to be dealt with differently to the normal zombies, skeletons and spiders that populate the levels. It's not really possible to have awareness of every single one of these details, and so you end up falling back on just the most important ones. I mentioned in my review of Book of Demons that, unlike most games, the tough battles are the least engaging, because when your health keeps dropping perilously close to zero, you can't afford to focus on anything else. You spend all your time staring at your health bar and chugging healing potions and miss out on getting good uses from your abilities or countering the special enemy types, and those are what make the game fun. If Book of Demons was a real-time with pause game, the variety of abilities and enemy types that the developers have put so much time into crafting would translate into more variety in the gameplay. So where does real-time with pause make sense? It works in games that focus on strategy, allowing players the time to come up with interesting plans, but also giving leniency in executing them. It works in games that require players to make a lot of actions that are outside the gameplay, such as selecting abilities or positioning units. And it also works in games where there are a lot of different things players can be reacting to, allowing smaller details or mechanics to be considered without harming a player's chance of winning by drawing focus away from more important features. Before it sounds like I consider real-time with pause to be the one true game mode, where does it not make sense? Well, a lot of places. It doesn't make sense when the intensity and fast pace of a game are vital. For example, hack and slash horde killing games like Dynasty Warriors. Dynasty Warriors? I haven't played that game since about 2006, so I have no idea why that was the game I thought of while I was writing this video, but anyway. It doesn't make sense in light games that don't rely on strategy like most platformers, and it doesn't make sense where the requirement for mechanical skill and the mistakes it inevitably causes are the game. And this covers almost all player versus player shooters and fighting games. Overwatch wouldn't be a lot of fun if Widowmakers could never miss, and in fact in bronze and silver ranks, Widowmaker players are physically banned from ever making headshots. Even though real-time with pause certainly has its advantages, it's still not popular as a system. Searching for the real-time with pause tag on Steam brings back a list of just 136 titles, over 10 times fewer than the results for turn-based games. So why is real-time with pause so uncommon? Well, we've already covered one reason. There are a lot of games where pausing doesn't make a lot of sense. But even in games where real-time with pause would work, it doesn't mean it's necessary. I personally would love to see a version of Age of Empires 2 with an ability to pause because I think it would be really interesting, but the game is a fantastic real-time strategy without it and wouldn't have sustained a player base for over 20 years if it wasn't. But I have some other thoughts. The lack of popularity of real-time with pause creates a feedback loop. If there's proof of a lot of turn-based and real-time games selling well, then maybe those systems are less of a risk for developers. Especially among more casual gamers, real-time and turn-based games have the advantage of being much easier to understand and advertise. I also have a suspicion that real-time with pause games are more difficult to create and balance. Turn-based games are, by their very nature, limited, and the reduced range of possibilities makes exploiting mechanics more difficult. Real-time games are able to balance through the player's mistakes. Sniper rifles being a key example of this. Sniper rifles in most video games would be considered broken if they weren't damn near impossible to use. When players can pause, every mechanic is put under a spotlight, and if there's room for one to become broken or be exploited, somebody is going to find it. I'll admit I have no evidence for this last point, it is just a suspicion, so let me know if you agree or disagree. Before the end of this video, there was one more thing I wanted to look at, which is examples of pause mechanics in real-time games. For the first one, I'll use Ratchet & Clank as my example, though it's by no means the only game to do this. Ratchet & Clank introduces a pause whenever a player goes to select a new weapon from the gun wheel. The variety of guns in the Ratchet series is probably its most defining feature, and so the game needs a way to allow players to switch between them without impacting the gameplay. As we mentioned before, one of the times that pausing works as a mechanic is when players need to be making selections that are outside of the core game, and that's the solution that Insomniac went for. On a related note, Insomniac copied their gun wheel from Ratchet & Clank in their 2014 parkour action shoot-'em-up Sunset Overdrive, but in this title, instead of pausing the game, the gun wheel just slowed down time. It felt like Insomniac didn't want any static moments in a game focused on movement, but new weapon selection at normal speed wouldn't work. The result was awkward, unsatisfying moments where you could miss jumps while selecting a weapon or pick the wrong one because you were rushing. It was a half measure and it felt like it. But what about a system that uses pause to enhance combat? The one that springs to mind for me is the VATS system in the Fallout series. The footage here is actually Fallout 4, and you'll see that in Fallout 4, VATS was changed to only apply a slowing effect rather than a true pause. I don't think this change was necessary, but at least in Fallout 4 the slowing effect is much greater than in Sunset Overdrive and the gameplay is less frantic, so the slow motion VATS isn't frustrating like the slow motion gun wheel. In a lengthy open world RPG with a focus on story and character upgrades, losing a lot of progress due to a lack of mechanical skill in combat would be a frustrating experience. VATS is a great way to mitigate this by giving players the ability to select the attack they were going to make instead of needing to pull it off themselves. Because of the action point system, you can't use VATS constantly, but it can be useful to guarantee a clutch kill. The third game I thought of was one that uses real time with pause and gets really creative with what this mechanic can do.
Super hot. Super hot.
The premise of Super Hot is that time only moves when you do, so by not pressing any buttons you effectively pause the game. While most real-time with pause games are overtly strategy games with either a top-down or isometric viewpoint, Super Hot is the only game I'm aware of that employs it in a first-person experience. I don't know if there's a lot of flexibility with this or how well a similar mechanic would translate into a more expansive game, but the puzzle of Super Hot's levels is a fascinating one and a great example of how developers can get creative with stopping time. I think what these examples show best is that giving players the time to make decisions can improve gameplay, and that emphasising pure skill isn't always the best approach, and I think it's a mechanic that definitely deserves more exploration. Real time with pause can be a fantastic tool for facilitating strategic and creative play and giving players the time to make the most of a broad range of mechanics instead of just the most important ones. While real time with pause certainly won't work in every type of game and isn't a necessity even in the genres where it does work, I'm always interested when I see a new real time with pause title because this underused mechanic has the potential to create truly epic games. Thank you for watching. If there are any games you loved that use this mechanic, let me know about them in the comments. I'm always interested in hearing about more real-time with pause titles. If you want to follow what I write in the future, subscribe to the channel and let YouTube notify you of future videos, and if you want to watch one right now, there's a video for you on the side of the screen. Thank you and goodbye.